Hey, this is Enaa, and I'm doing a slightly different review today. I'm actually going to talk about my favorite episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine called The Wire. So it's going to definitely more move into science fiction and popular culture. So I'd like to do some more of these if this one works out well. But some of my friends have told me you should talk about some of the television shows you like, some of the episodes that you like therein. And don't get worried. I still plan on doing all the astute political analysis and book reviews you've come to expect from this channel. But I really like to talk about this episode because it's really my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine. And I'm going to preface by saying I'm a pretty big science fiction fan. I love Star Trek, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine are my two favorite series. Voyager was pretty bad and Enterprise was in the sewer. I do like the original series. It's a little dated for me, but it's still enjoyable and I like probably about half the movies. I also like some other science fiction shows, and I actually have. And if you're interested, you can ask me about them, and I'll be doing them. But I want to talk about Deep Space Nine because Deep Space Nine takes us away from the more utopian flair we get from, say, the Next Generation or the original series. And in Deep Space Nine, it's definitely an area of gray. Essentially, the Federation is helping the planet Bajor rebuild, and Bajor had suffered under about 50 years of an occupation, colonial occupation by the Cardassians. And Bajor is also the site of the wormhole, so you can explore a distant quadrant of the galaxy there. So it's a real center of exploration, trade, intrigue. And the one thing Deep Space Nine does that I believe it surpasses all the other Star Trek series in doing is it has such a rich array of secondary characters. And this is going to come out in my favorite secondary character at least, of Deep Space Nine, which is Elim Garak. Elim Garak is the lone Cardassian on the space station. So when the other Cardassians left, he's still there and he's a tailor. He mends pants and things like that. But he's not just a tailor. He's very cultured. He's very charming. And you don't know if he's a spy or not, because the Cardassians in Deep Space Nine are one of the bad guys. And I'm going to add right here that the Cardassians are probably my favorite Star Trek race, just because I love the various portrayals we see of them. We see the characters of Goldar Heel, Gul Dukat, Damar, Enaa, and of course Garak. I love the Cardassians are just fantastic. The actors they've had to play them are just amazing. Anyway, this episode it takes place largely between Garak and the station's doctor named Julian Bashir. Now, if you watch the first two seasons of Deep Space Nine, and even later, Dr. Bashir is not like the most endearing character. He's kind of arrogant. He's a ladies' man, and he's really naive in many senses. But he's friends with Garak. They share lunch together like once a week or so. And Garak is from Cardassia. He came from the society that's almost fascistic in its nature. Duty to the state is the highest duty. And that's Garak's mentality. And Bashir is a very Federation idealist. He says there's more to life than duty to the state. But he's still friends with this man. And the story involves, and there's spoilers in here, so if you don't want to, you should probably stop. Garak he's not feeling well. He's having headaches, he's having seizures, and he's kind of really getting on Dr. Bashir's nerves because he's like refusing help from him. And it turns out through the course of this episode that Garak is on some kind of drug. There's some kind of implant in his head. We're not sure, is it a punishment device or not? And Bashir is trying to help his friend because Garak is not going to Dr. Bashir. Garak is going through all the shady channels. He's having people send messages to Cardassia because he can't go to Cardassia. He's exiled for reasons we're not sure. And Garak is is through his intermediaries trying to get the specs to the device in his head. And it turns out the specs are classified. They're in the hands of a group called the Obsidian Order, which is the Cardassian intelligence service, and to put it suffice, your worst fears or impressions of, say, the KGB or the Gestapo, just think of that when you think of the Obsidian Order. So Bashir eventually finds out from Garak about this device, and it turns out it's not, because supposedly it's punishing him. He's really hurt. He's really suffering, but it's not a punishment device. In fact, the device was originally intended for Garak to resist torture because he was entrusted with certain information. We don't know what that information is per se, and it was designed if Garak ever suffered torture, that the device would produce like endorphins that would increase the pleasure centers of his brain and therefore allow him to endure torture. But Garak turned the device on and never turned it off because he's in exile. He hates living among Bajorans who were conquered for 50 years, were conquered by his people. It's too cold for him, and everyone doesn't really like him because he's just a Cardassian. He's one of the despised races in Star Trek. But Bashir wants to help his friend, and he tries to convince Garak to turn off the device to tell him, and Garak tells him why he was exiled, and it turns out that he was part of the occupation of Bajor, and some prisoners escaped. He tracked them to a shuttle, and he had the shuttle destroyed, killing all the civilians, the pilot, and the prisoners, and coincidentally his friend who had gone on the shuttle to try and get the prisoners. And Bashir is horrified to learn that his friend killed about 70 people indiscriminately following orders. And Garak says that in tracing down that on the shuttle was a daughter of a prominent military official, who was killed, and Garak is stripped of his rank and sent into exile. Bashir still decides to help him. The device is turned off, and Garak is he's suffering withdrawal because his brain isn't producing the endorphins. And during the suffering of withdrawal, Bashir is trying to comfort his friend, trying to help him out, and it turns out that Garak doesn't really want his help. He's really hostile, and he tells Bashir, like, he doesn't like Bashir. He's not a friend. He can't believe he enjoys being around this man, and he tells Bashir that why he was exiled again, and this is a different story. This is story 2. He tells him, I was exiled because I captured some kids on the street of Bajor, and they were being interrogated, but he was so cold, miserable, and he was with an assistant, and he just thought the whole exercise was pointless, and he just gives them some food and money and thrusts them onto the street. And in response, he's sent into exile because he should have followed his orders and sent those prisoners to be executed. And Garak is really upset about this. So Bashir's trying to help him, but it's not working. He's still suffering withdrawal. He has to go to the sick bay. And in the sick bay, Bashir finds that he needs to go to Cardassia to get some medical information because he doesn't have it on the station. Garak tells him a third story of why he was exiled. And the third story is that he was an assistant to Enaa Brentane, who is the head of the Obsidian Order. And because he was friends with someone named Elam, and Garak supposedly there was a scandal and they were both very powerful men, Elam and Garak. And there was a scandal about some prisoners being escaped. So Garak is trying to secure his position, so he's trying to frame his friend. But it turns out that Elam had framed him for the scandal, and he sent into exile. Now, those are the 3 stories we have on Garak. And Bashir, he's not sure what to believe, because he's heard 3 different stories about why this man was exiled. So Bashir goes to Cardassian space. He finds Enaa Brentane, and Garak kind of left a hint of this. Tane gives him the information, and Bashir tries to find out about Garak's friend, who is mentioned in all the 3 stories, named Elam. And turns out Elam is actually Garrick's first name because Garrick is a compulsive liar. So to wrap it up, Garrick gets healed, and Bashir asks him, well, out of the stories you told me, which ones are true and which ones are false? Garrick says, they're all true. And Bashir says, even the lies, and Garrick says, especially the lies. Now, this episode is a very heavy character piece. And and when I first watched it, I wasn't sure quite what to think because we never find out exactly why Garrick is exiled from Cardassia in the show. We get 3 different stories. And we're not quite sure. And there was some disappointment among Star Trek fans. Well, we never got to tell why he was exiled, but that's not the point. Did Garrick kill those prisoners? Did he not? Was he a hero? Was he a butcher? We don't know, and there's a lot of ambiguity, and I watch it different ways, and I sometimes wonder if these stories are just total fabrications, and all Garrick's trying to do is test Bashir. I don't know. But I almost wonder about Garrick, and this is kind of a more political angle. So my question, what I've been wondering as I keep watching this episode, and I watch it every few months, just it kind of reminds me what great television is. And Garrick was a member of the Obsidian Order that's established later in the series. And I just want to say that he's a member of the intelligence service, so they torture, they're ruthless, they're efficient, and they're totalitarian, and all that type of stuff. And he was involved in a colonial occupation in some fashion. The Cardassians, again, they have a fascistic government throughout most of Star Trek. And I'm wondering, was he exiled because he refused to follow orders? Was it just something petty? And now that he's in exile among Bajorans, is he thinking about what he did as a colonial official? Is he really kind of questioning the mentality of what he did? Because although he's still proud of Cardassian culture and heritage, he was involved in something exceptionally brutal, and this is made clear throughout Star Trek. And if you watch earlier episodes with Garrick, he kind of recognizes some of what Cardassia did during the occupation of Bajor. And I'm wondering, did he originally turn on this drug not to really escape that he's away from home, but to escape the knowledge like, oh dear God, I was part of an oppressive colonial force that was brutalizing the Bajorans. And I'm still part of and it's like, and just like that knowledge, like I was doing horrible things to these people. So he kind of puts on this punishment or this device just so he really doesn't have to deal with it. I don't know. It's a possible interpretation. But we see throughout Star Trek Deep Space Nine the effects of this occupation of Bajor, not just on the Bajorans and their interactions with the Federation, but also among the Cardassians. And I'm wondering, is Garrick kind of having second thoughts about what he had to participate in? Is he really questioning it? And coming off this drug really forces him to confront it. I don't know, but I just want to say that this is my favorite episode of this series. And it poses questions that have no easy answers. It's not just, a shoot 'em up space adventure, but it really is a great character piece. Anyway, I just want to say to those of you who watch this channel, there's some future reviews or overviews. Mao's Mass Line is coming up, and hopefully some more Gramsci. And if you enjoy this, please request. I'd love to do some more Star Trek episodes. Anyway, this is Enaa. Until next time.